I need to talk about the reactionary positions of Sakaism and Gonzaloism. This video is for everybody, but this is mostly for third worldists like myself and Maoist comrades. I have to credit much of what I'm about to say to the Maoist comrades for this strand of thinking, but I also intend to call back to when I had done something very similar. Some say that Maoism is the application of Marxism-Leninism to the conditions that are peculiar to the situation in China during the life of Mao Zedong. This definition is based on a dangerous misnomer. Maoism is not Mao Zedong thought. Mao indeed applied Marxism-Leninism to Chinese conditions and applied it in a way that was far superior to that of Vladimir Lenin. But if Maoism were the only application of Marxism-Leninism to the conditions that are peculiar to China, it would be the same as Mao Zedong thought, purely a Chinese and Chinese-only phenomenon. We know, however, that Maoism is not merely a Chinese, but an international phenomenon, rooted in the whole international development. That is how we know this definition suffers from disinformation. Maoism is based upon Lin Biao and the original Black Panther Party. Marxism, Leninism, Maoism is not Mao Zedong thought. The full term for Maoism is Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. The synthesis of MLM did not occur until the life of Mao Zedong from the 1960s. Groups that called themselves Maoists or which upheld Maoism were not unified around a common understanding of Maoism and had instead their own particular interpretations of the political, philosophical, economical, and military works of Mao. As a unified, coherent stage of Marxism, MLM was not synthesized until the 1980s through the experience of peoples who were waged by the Shining Path. This led the Shining Path to posit MLM as the newest development of Marxism. Abimael Guzmán was the vindication for the theory and practice of the revolutionary internationalist movement. The Communist Party of Peru, more commonly known as the Shining Path, is a revolutionary communist party and political organization in Peru espousing MLM. The Communist Party of Peru was the first vanguard party to espouse MLM. The reason the Communist Party of Peru is more commonly called the Shining Path has a lot to do with the origins of it. I plan to make 2 documentaries, one on Maoism, one on Third-worldism. This will be important for those who need to understand the difference. The full term Maoism, Third-worldism is Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, Third-worldism. So you cannot be a third-worldist without understanding Maoism. That is why I plan on doing 2 documentaries on Maoism and Third-worldism. But first, I need to dispel both Sakaism and Gonzaloism. Sakaism and Gonzaloism are the 2 major political heresies that cannot be tolerated by neither Maoist third-worldists or MLMs. Let me take you to what I said on December 30th, 2018. I want to talk to you about a document that was recently put out in Latin America. It's called the Joint Declaration of the First Latin American Conference of Chile, and it happened on December 1st or the 2nd of this year. Now, it should be noted that these individuals are Gonzaloists, and so this is the framework from which they're approaching things. Now, their statement included a lot of things that are outright patently false, things that are outright reactionary, and I do want to take issue with a bunch of them. Before I get further into this, let me start by telling you something that I have never said before. When I first became a Maoist, I did not exactly know the difference between Mao Zedong thought and Maoism. I began to study Maoism as I was investigating Third-worldism at the same time. The differences between Third-worldism and Maoism are not apparent to most of my Maoist comrades. I was getting deeper into the study of the revolutionary internationalist movement, the Shining Path, at the same exact time that I began to study the theory and practice of Third-worldism. Marxist-Leninist Maoists tend to view MLM Third-worldism as revolutionary defeatism for MLM. No offense, comrades, but you're wrong. I am now going to directly quote my Maoist comrades. Third-worldism is a study of the global class divide. Nothing more or less than that. There is no such thing as a third-worldist, Jason Unruhe, and all members of the LLCO are not third-worldists. They are Maoists who are fed up with fake Maoists. Now, you could tell that this is different from what the detractors hiding behind MLM have typically said about third-worldism. Those that are genuinely MLM view third-worldism as a study of the global class divide. But, like myself, consider third-worldism to be a higher stage of Maoism, just as the Maoists consider Maoism to be a higher stage of Marxism-Leninism. Now, they're affirming commitment of the Communist Party of Peru's shining path and the Communist Party of Chile to Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. Okay, fine, well enough. At no point should we downplay the importance of Abimael Guzmán or the Communist Party of Peru's shining path. The USSR and the Eastern Bloc was in decline in the 1980s. As this was happening, the Revolutionary Internationalist Movement, or RIM, was looking back at Mao's revolutionary China and how it had inspired a world revolution. Abimael Guzmán proved the universality of People's War at this time. And, by the way, this was his contribution, not that he is a new pillar to Marxism. The 5 pillars of Marxism are Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao. Abimael Guzmán was not a new pillar. What he did do was show the world that the world revolutionary practice of Maoism was correct. You see, at that time, Mao had discredited himself in the eyes of many MLs, yet many of them hypocritically did not want to see the Soviet Union had become social imperialist. With RIM and the shining path, the synthesis of MLM was declared. Now, we now could recognize that Maoism was both a continuity and rupture in Marxism-Leninism. Hence, RIM declared MLM. It is not so much that something new was reached. It was the retroactive revelation that Maoism really was true. Now it could be vindicated. The shining path was proof. But it calls out revisionism. It calls out people who support the fascist government of Venezuela. So essentially they're calling the Venezuelan government fascist, which would lead me to believe that they don't know what fascism is. Fascism is, in one of the most loosely understood sense, when there's a total alliance between capital and the state. Of course, that would describe the opposite of Venezuela. Venezuelan government is at war with capital in the country. Now, by no means can you claim Venezuela socialist. They're social democratic at best because they refuse to take the final step and go into a full revolution. That would be a rightful criticism. But calling Venezuela fascist is simply nonsense. Now, the reason that they do this is because they target people who target purely U.S. imperialism rather than Russian and Chinese imperialism. Now, you can make those criticisms. You can criticize the Chinese for the imperialist actions that they are taking in Africa. And to some degree, you can criticize Russia as well. But I don't see what this has to do with Venezuela. Venezuela is going through its own struggle and seeking out alliances with other countries, not the United States. So you tend to get this idea of where is it that they're getting this idea from? Well, a lot of this has to do with the incorrect political thinking of the Gonzaloists in general. Now, there was an organization called the RIM, of which Bob Avakian was the head. Now, the RIM was what stepped in when essentially China turned to revisionism, and they claimed to uphold Mao's line. They claimed to uphold Maoism. I think I should point out that the Bolivarian revolution, at least in the form of Chavismo, is socialist, but due to its lack of Marxism, it will not reach social victory unless it overthrows the bourgeois Spanish colonists. Unlike First World Social Democracy, Third World Social Democracy could theoretically transition to socialism. But to do this, the capitalist class must be criminalized. And for the sake of anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism, it is important to support the Bolivarian Revolution. But the Bolivarian Revolution is still stuck in social democracy. This is why it is likely to fall, and it needs to be Marxist. All third-worldists and genuine Maoists need to combat both Gonzaloists and the populist fake Maoists. Many of the populist fake Maoists accuse Maoists of Gonzaloism, but this is a slanderous reckoning because even though Abimael Guzmán has become rather reactionary, he is still very important for study. No one can claim to understand MLM without acknowledging Abimael Guzmán. See, but the problem with that is that they sided with the rightists. I mean, anybody who bothers to really look at what Mao's policies were later in his leadership sees that he is very rightist, and this particularly has to do with regards to the three worlds theory, which over and over again, I have to remind people, has nothing to do with third-worldism. Essentially, they were saying that allying with the U.S. over the Soviet Union and other states like that, which is reactionary nonsense. It completely is. However, because RIM and the Gonzaloists did this for so long, and they supported the rightist positions in Mao, they kind of, rather than admitting that they were wrong and that Mao was wrong in this regard, they continued to keep the essence of that criticism. That, well, if you cannot just criticize the U.S., you have to criticize other states, even when they're not doing imperialist things. Like, you see where I'm kind of going with this, why they attack people who attack the U.S. for carrying out imperialism inside of Venezuela. I mean, what evidence is there that Russia or China are doing that? I mean, yeah, they're making loans, but keep in mind that these are not socialist states. These are capitalist states, so they are going to make loans. It's the nature of the loan that makes the difference. But you can see why they hold this position, because this comes out of the incorrect three worlds theory kind of orientation. This goes along with a lot of the incorrect line that the Gonzaloists continue to have, because they are incapable of criticizing their incorrect line because it comes from following the incorrect line of Mao. It is time to mention what we already know, and we need to say this without fear. The RIM and the Shining Path did prove something important. But let's stop bullshitting ourselves. Just as Mao fell to reaction, so did Abimael Guzmán. He was a known dogmatist in many ways. We don't need to go as far as to water down his importance. That, too, is the incorrect thing to do. But we need to understand that Gonzaloism is right opportunism. It was the right opportunists that destroyed RIM. Three worlds theory is rejected by MLM. The RIM used to completely reject three worlds theory. Then at some point during their twilight, they decided there was nothing wrong with three worlds theory, because if Abimael Guzmán could vindicate Maoism, then he must always be right. This is the type of shit that right opportunists pulled on the rest of RIM. This smacks of COINTELPRO, which, by the way, grew way beyond the FBI. Think about how much money was spent by the U.S. destroying the Shining Path. Who wouldn't agree that the U.S. had performed psyops on RIM? Those that refused to see how big COINTELPRO was, those that refused to believe that they would have destroyed RIM from inside, are idealists. Just as Mao fell to the rightist opportunists, so did RIM. Gonzaloism is the very right opportunism that destroyed RIM. And the point of Gonzaloists is to promote themselves as the real face of Maoism. They're the ones that created Maoism. Therefore, if they criticize Mao, they're criticizing themselves. Well, it's just simply not true that Gonzalo created Maoism. This is an absolute lie. In fact, Maoism was created by the theorist Chen Boda and Lin Biao. They were the ones responsible for the creation of Maoism. Now, Lin Biao, being the left side of the Chinese Communist Party, was eventually assassinated by the right, which included Mao and many of the reactionary rightist policies that he did have. But this isn't something that's going to be acknowledged by the Gonzaloists. Instead, they uphold the reactionary era of Mao's policies rather than admitting where Mao made mistakes. MLM is a political philosophy built upon ML and Mao Zedong thought, which was first formulated in the 1980s by the Revolutionary Internationalist movement. It is important to study Chen Boda, Lin Biao, Elders Cleaver, Huey P. Newton, Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, Frantz Fanon, and Mao Zedong himself. You'll never understand Maoism without a study of these men, and I am not the first to say this, nor are my Maoist comrades. The first to say the sort of thing that I was actually saying was actually RIM itself. They used to say this before they were co-opted by right opportunists. Gonzalo did not start Maoism. He restored it when everyone was losing communist enthusiasm. Even if you reject third-worldism, you must at least learn Maoism. You cannot just pick up the Red Book quotations by Mao and declare yourself MLM. So again, you need to study. Chen Boda, Lin Biao, Eldridge Cleaver, Huey P. Newton, Frederick Hampton, Malcolm X, Franz Fanon, Mao Zedong, and yes, you need to study Rim, Gonzalo, and the Shining Path. The Gonzaloists would tell you to do otherwise, and they would be wrong to do so, because then they would have to admit their own mistakes. Now, they have to do this in order to justify Mao's reactionary stance of simply allying with the rightists rather than doing the right thing and that opposing them. And this largely happened because of the burgeoning criticism of the party was starting to push Mao out of power. And given the policies that he put forth, he should have been pushed out of power because he was giving reactionary rightist nonsense, and it would have been right to kick him out of the party. And this has a lot to do with the very dishonest way that Gonzalo and the Gonzaloists, I mean the people in the country, etc. There is no Gonzaloism. It's literally nothing. Gonzalo made no contribution to theory whatsoever. All he has done is simply parrot things that have been said in the past by theorists, and that somehow this means he created something. I mean, this is complete nonsense. I mean, this parroting of the reactionary Chinese line led to them doing things like assassinating people from the DPRK that were in the country. Mao Zedong was correct to reject Nikita Khrushchev, yet he was incorrect to accept Richard Nixon. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was a secondary contradiction. The Three Worlds theory was anti-dialectical and reactionary. Everyone that defends the reactionary line of Three Worlds theory is shilling for Americanism. Everyone shilling for Americanism exposes themselves as anti-Maoists. Third-worldists and MLMs both attacked by Gonzaloists as being, quote, Lin Biaoists, because during the end of the life of Lin Biao, he began to oppose the new Three Worlds theory of Mao Zedong. In 1972, when Richard Nixon came to visit China, this marks a revisionist and reactionary change in Mao Zedong thought. Before the year of 1972, Mao Zedong began to centralize power, and Lin Biao sought to oppose this. Lin Biao was very loyal to Mao Zedong, but he was even more loyal to the revolutionary line of Mao Zedong. Think about it, comrades. Lin Biao died on September 13th, 1971, and then on February 21st, 1972, Mao Zedong meets Richard Nixon. This is not a coincidence. When Mao Zedong fell to reaction, this destroyed what was the World Revolution. That revolution was rescued by RIM in the 1980s, finding vindication in People's War waged by the Communist Party of Peru's Shining Path. RIM declared MLM in the 1980s once more. They declared this again in 1993. MLM was not invented by Gonzalo or RIM. Again, the declaration of MLM was a retroactive revelation by RIM because of what Gonzalo provided. How can the Gonzaloists claim that Gonzalo invented Maoism? They can't, because they don't want you to learn about the Black Panther Party or how important Lin Biao actually was. The thing that the Gonzaloists fear the most is actual MLMs. To avoid confusion, I'm going to refer to my Maoist comrades as the Federated MLM Cadres. The Federated MLM Cadres have asked their comrades in St. Louis some questions that they wish would be confronted in the struggle sessions. Why did Mao Zedong refuse to meet with Huey P. Newton? The fact that Huey was not a head of state is not an answer. The answer is because Huey and Tricky Dicky were enemies and Mao was selling out. Think about that. I mean, that's just one example, was the Gonzaloists who had them killed. Why would you kill people from the DPRK by attacking the embassy in the country? Why? What good did that do? Because this was the kind of anti-Soviet bad line that Mao had. Obviously, the Soviet Union was revisionist during that time, but that by no means you side with the imperialist United States against the revisionist Soviet Union. But you can see how this leads them into like these really wrong tactics that they're not capable of, really criticizing themselves on. I'm kind of not explaining it entirely clearly, but you understand what I'm saying. Now, there's some other things there, like they argued that there's going to be a world war coming, and that one of the powers, Russia, China, or whatever, is going to essentially replace the United States, and it will lead to the downfall of imperialism. A world war has never led to the downfall of imperialism. No, a world war has replaced one imperialist power with another. That has certainly happened. That happened coming out of World War I and World War II. But they don't give any indication why it would be different this time, or why it is that it will destroy imperialism in general. Maybe a world war will destroy everybody, and there will be no more imperialism? Maybe that's the angle they're going for. They're not clear about this in their document, which I did link in the description. But it says it will lead to the downfall of imperialism within 50 to 100 years. In 1963, the original Black Panther Party was established a relationship with the DPRK leadership that was based upon the principle of self-reliance under the rubric of Juche ideology, the transnational goal of Third World Revolution, and a mutual antagonism toward the American interventionism around the world. Although the U.S. government forbade its citizens from traveling to the DPRK, the Black Panther Party leader, Eldridge Cleaver, along with other Panthers, bypassed travel restrictions and visited the DPRK to join anti-imperialist journalist conferences in 1969 and 1970. In the DPRK, the Black Panthers found a new ideology and a government that was critical of the U.S. government. The Black Panthers established an alliance with North Korean leaders, who they recognized as an independent force within the world communist movement. They believed that the black colony inside the United States could learn from the DPRK's self-reliant stance in political, economic, and cultural matters. Vladimir Lenin once said, "Without a revolutionary theory, there cannot be a revolutionary movement." The Black Panthers had no issue doing this by finding theory in the DPRK ideology. Gonzaloism runs counter to the MLM line. The problem is that the world doesn't have 50 to 100 years. I mean, even the most optimistic, estimates put the destruction of Earth at like 20 to 30 years. That's like looking on the bright side kind of thing. Now, let me explain something by contrast. In 20 years, the country of Bangladesh will be underwater from flooding. And that's like an optimistic view, 20 years. Others claim it'll happen much earlier. So the world doesn't have 50 to 100 years. So I don't know what the point of making that will be. Maybe they are climate change deniers. I don't know. It would make sense given this kind of position. But I'm not going to speak for them on this situation because I don't know if they... I haven't read anything on them with regards to climate change, so I'm not gonna guess what their position on this is. But I would think that if you did believe in climate change, you would know that the world does not have 50 to 100 years. So I find that very strange. And what is they don't make very specific what's to be done with that kind of information with the 50 to 100 years. It's very strange. It is super perplexing that Gonzaloists hold to the bullshit that they hold to. The federated MLM cadres have educated me quite a bit, and for this I am very grateful. According to the federated MLM cadres, the Maoist Communist Party Organizing Committee is genuine. I'm not going to lie. Black Red Guard knows absolutely nothing about me or the LLCO. That being said, Black Red Guard and his comrades in the Maoist Communist Party know more about Abimael Guzmán than the very foolish, moronic Gonzaloists that literally know nothing about RIM or the Shining Path. It really matters not to me anymore if Black Red Guard thinks third-worldism is revisionist. I stand with struggle. I strongly suggest that anyone wanting to know about actual Maoism subscribe to Black Red Guard, and you will learn more about Abimael Guzmán from him than you will from the Gonzaloists. This kind of, so-called Maoism is very heavily influenced by the American Maoists. I go further in this video comparing American Maoists to anarchists. In retrospect, I wish I had not made that kind of comparison. but essentially everything I said in the video is correct. Now, on to the other political heresy, Sakai-ism. But first I must clarify that it is very common for Maoists to read Settlers, the Myth of the White Proletariat from Mayflower to Modern. But this book is completely dropped by Third-worldists. Actual Third-worldists. And just to clarify before stupid people say stupid things, Black Red Guard and his comrades are not Sakaiists. Sakaism was actually ideology of the revolutionary anti-imperialist movement, known as RAIM. Before I go further, I am not out to hurt anyone that was associated with RAIM, but I know for a fact that the Black Internationalists had been associated with them in the past, and I'm a huge fan of hers. So I bring you to a video what I did on May 25th, 2019. There's something that I want to take issue with. There is incorrect ideas about third-worldism, and particularly there is a fake third-worldist idea out there. Now, some people believe this is a part of third-worldism because there are people claiming to be third-worldist who are doing this. So I can understand why the confusion would be there, why people would think that. So it's perfectly rational that this mistake would be made. So I don't really blame those people. I blame the fake third-worldists that are pushing this incorrect line, or at least would be incorrect according to our particular ideology. Now, one of those things is Sakai-ism. Sakai-ism is victimization turned into ideology. No one should even read Settlers, the Myth of the White Proletariat from Mayflower to Modern without reading the writings of Frantz Fanon. According to the Federated MLM cadres, the Redneck Manifesto, How Hillbillies, Hicks, and White Trash Became America's Scapegoats, should be read alongside Settlers by J. Sakai, and then gives you a much clearer picture of how history emerges. Now, the Federated MLM comrades maintain a strong stance on reading both Settlers and the Redneck Manifesto by Jim Goat to draw up some sort of synthesis on the oppression of minorities brought about it by the lie of whiteness, but a Sakaiist will never do this. Even though the Redneck Manifesto comes with a lot of off-color language, it's actually a very anti-racist book. It confronts the true ills of capitalism. This is not a book which should be read on its own. On its own, it could be misused by nosballs. This is the very reason why third-worldists drop Settlers. Why do we need another book just to synthesize J. Sakai's book? Surely the Federated MLM cadres know and understand not all MLM go the direction they go. Why can't Frantz Fanon be enough? Legit question. I'm actually asking, not patronizing. There is so much that could be said about this, but one thing is very clear. Reading J. Sakai does not make you a Sakaiist. I am a third-worldist. I have worked with the LLCO on more than one project. The LLCO is diverse. RAIM started as a major smear campaign against the LLCO, but it was not personal. They started an even greater smear campaign against me, and this was personal on their end. At the end of the video, you'll come to know why they attacked me so hard. Many, not all rumors about the LLCO as petty bourgeois originate from RAIM. The LLCO has a lot of ethnic diversity. It is not a white rich man's club. Now, in a nutshell, third-worldism is considered to be a higher stage of Maoism, just as Maoism is considered to be a higher stage of Leninism. Now, we've all heard read Settlers. I would recommend probably reading it but not taking it too seriously. Essentially, TLDR, Sakai-ism is, well, white people evil. Now, that's a very anatized version of it. Essentially, it says that there is no white proletariat, etc., and that Black Americans are the biggest victims on the face of the earth, which is not true. The third world would be. I mean, I don't think it's anything controversial to say that a white person who lives in a third world country has less privilege than a black person who lives in a first world country. I mean, that should be pretty obvious, and that maybe class is something that's a little bit more important in terms of Marxist theory than race. So the problem is that while oppression really does exist, race oppression does exist in the first world, I'm not saying it doesn't. I wouldn't say that. although I'm certain a few people would claim I said that because they're dishonest assholes. Let me put it to you this way. Essentially, this kind of Sakai-ism, which not necessarily comes down to J. Sakai himself, but many of the people who follow what he wrote, in that it would be everything but white males-ism. My point was not to promote class reductionism. Unfortunately, that may have been what resulted from my statements here. I oppose class reductionism just as much as I do liberal identity politics. I don't think that J. Sakai meant for his work to be used by Rehm to form an ID-pol ideology. Rehm was guilty of polarizing the left into two destructive camps, of the class reductionism common to many Hojists and the neo-colonial identity politics common to that many that run the anti-Semitic group of Black Hammer. Trotskyists and fake anarchists both belong to a Eurocentric whiteness. Rehm insulted the memory of the Black Panthers, which is a big no-no in third-worldism. Now, there's at least one fake third-worldist group I can think of which pushes this line. It says trans, women, every ethnic minority is inherently revolutionary in the first world, and all of the third world is revolutionary. So it's a tantamount to saying everything but white maleism. I mean, this kind of nonsensical position is essentially social justice warrior thinking. Can anyone remember the old Social Justice Warriors website? It was a very strange liberal website. I can't find the archives for it, but it was about demasculinizing isolated men. Now, this seemed to me to be the flip side of the incel garbage. Never mind that many of the female indigenous rights activists reject feminism, and that's an issue that it's really their business, so I'm not going to make an argument about that. First worldism locks the first worlder into two camps. One is the SJW that hates genuine social justice, and the other is the alt-right that empowers whiteness attempting to paint us leftists, actually aiming for true social justice, as SJWs. Which is fine if you're a social justice warrior, but not if you're a Marxist. Now, here's the problem. That directly contradicts third-worldism, and that's my issue. If you want to believe Sakai-ism, or you're just a straight-up liberal with a Marxist aesthetic, that's fine. That's what your ideology is, and that would make sense to you. But not if you're a third-worldist, because this Sakai-ism and third-worldism ultimately contradict each other. Because we stand by the idea that the first world is privileged enough, that it has no significant revolutionary potential, and that the working class of the first world is bought off with social democratic reforms, wages which exceed their contribution to the labor process, etc. I don't have the time to go into all of that, but that's the theory. So if you were to say that Black people in the United States don't benefit from imperialism, which is the assumption under Sakai-ism, then you'd be contradicting yourself. I mean, it's as if, Black people don't use the same roads as white people, or they don't use the same government programs as white people. A poor white person in the first world gets welfare the same as a poor Black person in the first world gets welfare, or particularly the United States. There's a particular United States connotation to all of this. So Black people in the first world do benefit from imperialism. Maybe not to the degree that white people do, but they certainly do. The point here is not to water down white privilege. The point is to call out the Rehm ideology. Sakaism ignores neo-colonialism. J. Sakai would oppose that. Think about this. Unlike the LLCO, Rehm, which has done no work in the third world, goes to let's say Ethiopia and tries to promote the line that all of the Christians, Jews, Muslims there to overthrow religion because transphobia, well, that smacks of whiteness. And by the way, Rehm has never done anything for the lumpen trans community except psychologically abuse them. I could literally talk about class oppression on social media, and a bunch of white males with fake POC accounts could yell at me, "Shut up, whitey." That type of shit happened to me all the time. That is the type of gatekeeping that the LLCO would never tolerate. This contradicts Sakai-ism, which essentially says the opposite. So you cannot be a Sakaist and a third worldist. You can be one or the other. They are mutually exclusive. If you want to be a Sakaist, go ahead. That's first-worldism, and I don't expect any significant portion of the Marxist community to come to a correct political line. They will come to the one that they feel makes them feel better, or what have you. As a third worldist, this position is unacceptable. So that would be the only problem that I have, is that these two are mutually exclusive things. However, you do have a fake third worldist group running a group that claims to uphold third worldism that does do it, and they are essentially contradicting themselves. The victimhood mentality of RAIM is preached where Sakaism comes from. Sakaism has nothing to do with third worldism or even Maoism. Real Maoists that read J. Sakai do so with context. If you're trying to understand colonial settlers, you should read Frantz Fanon before you ever touch J. Sakai's book. That is just standard MLM. Third worldists, actual third worldists, pay very close attention to neo-colonialism. We must understand that the United States military is used to further neo-colonialism. We believe in Pantherism. We want to promote global empathy. We want to keep up the MLM philosophy before we go by different tactics. I know my audience. There are many fellow Europeans that want to shake off the white lie. A true anti-colonial pan-Europeanism means to seek cooperation with Asia, Africa. White pride does not work. White guilt does not work. The contradictions of the first world, second world, third world, and fourth world indigenous natives throughout North America, Mexico, New Zealand, Australia, and Palestine is getting deeper. We must fight for change. Sakaism is a distraction. It does not say anything about the Jews forced to move to Israel, USA, or Canada in any true context. Sakaists don't talk about the censored Jewish anti-Zionist minority. Are you going to scream settler and at fleeing immigrants? It is not even J. Sakai's fault that Sakaism is confusing third worldists and Maoists. It is the fault of white leftists that started RAIM. It is time that I mentioned that I knew the founding members of RAIM when it was reformulated, not the original one from way, way back when it was a part of the LLCO. I mean the ones that refounded it after it broke off under identity politics. I knew a lot of those people. We were friends for years. And I was willing to ask questions to the trans community. This was never allowed. Never mind the fact at the time trans people had been invited to RAIM, were very willing to answer any questions that I had, but the cis-white gatekeepers controlling RAIM told any trans person I came into contact with not to answer my questions. I asked questions to any marginalized group. Newsflash, most lumpen trans people are very happy to answer questions about their gender identity, and there is no unified standard. And many of the poorest trans people remain unhappy about this. As I have already stated, I cannot speak for trans people, but I believe the Black Internationalist can. If she's listening, you are beautiful, my friend. Your documentary about First World Lumpen is very good. The Black Internationalist can speak for the lumpen trans community, so she can speak for black people. She, like anyone genuine malice, is well versed in Frantz Fanon, making her worthy of understanding J. Sakai in context. In closing, MRN has finally become resistance journalism in the bourgeois first world. I'm in contact with the lumpen in Arizona, one of my closest comrades. Yes, even one of my, reliable people is comrade number 3 of the Navajo Nation. Me as a third worldist consider the systemic ongoing genocide against his people, the Native Americans, to be of the utmost importance. Anti-white politics has only made whitey stronger. Whiteness needs to be deconstructed and explained along with every other first world phenomenon. Not only can Black Red Guard explain Jay Sakai's book better than a Sakaist, as he no doubt understands the work of Frantz Fanon, he can actually explain The Shining Path. Any attack on Black Red Guard on this particular subject is wrong. Any attack on the Black internationalists on this part is wrong. From my point of view, she is a fellow Maoist. When the rad femmes and the trans comrades fight each other instead of the alt-right, this is incorrect. I cannot tolerate seeing the bigoted slurs of TERF and tranny in my comment section. Engage in dialectical reciprocity. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.